What up, Internet? This is Niels RY, aka I'm the best there is at what I do, but what I do isn't very nice. And I am here with another bonus episode. But y'all, this is going to be a pretty special bonus episode. As you all know, if you're a member of the pop cult, in the past, we haven't really dabbled in the world of comic books. You know, we've kind of talked about a few issues of comics. I give you all some context on some of the superhero movies that we're watching, but like we never really like dabbled in the world of comics like you know, we could or should. But that changes today. There is one series of books that is about to change all of that in the history of pop cult parent. And that book is the 2019 series called House and Power of X, written by none other than the living legend, Jonathan Hickman. And if we're going to talk about this series of books, I need help to do it. And we need to pull a heavy hitter. And so I'm pulling out a living legend in his own right. Pop cult, I am privileged, I am humbled to introduce you to my role model, my big brother, my homie, my coach, the evil genius himself, Dr. Micheal Stevens. Dr. Micheal Stevens, welcome to the pop cult.
Oh man, thank you, Niels. Thank you. Hi y'all. I'm Mike, aka the Black Summers brother, aka Magneto was right. I'm happy to be on here with you.
Mike, I gotta say it is long overdue. We should have been had you on the show, but you know what? I feel like this of any episode of Pop Cult Parent, this is the perfect one to have you come on here and to bestow us with your genius and knowledge of all things mutants. I mean, all things comic books in general, but definitely I feel like if your time was to come in Pop Cult Parent, it had to be mutant related. So I'm very excited, man. How you doing? How you doing?
Right on time. I'm doing good. All the kids is back in school. Folks is doing what they gotta do. And life is good. Life is good right now. I can't complain.
Awesome. So before we jump in and talk about the amazing nerddom that is House and Power of X and just X-Men in general, Mike, can you tell the folks, look, my favorite podcast is Pop Call Parent, but there is a very close number two, and that is Coaching Changemakers of Color, hosted by none other than yourself. Can you please share a little bit to the Pop Call about your amazing podcast?
Well, thank you. Thank you. So I like to say my daytime job is trying to make the community and the world a better place. So I've been in the nonprofit sector now over 16 years, and I get to meet some great, amazing people, and thought that I want to find a way to kind of share some of the lessons that I learned and some of the great insight and advice that people share with me all the time. So that's where coaching for change makers of color came up. So imagine, if you will, if you were out here trying to make the world a better place, whether you're a volunteer at your church, or you're doing an internship, or you're a career professional, and you want to make the world a better place, chances are you would probably love having some insight and getting some coaching. So imagine leadership and executive coaching specifically for us as people of color who are trying to make the world a better place. That's what the Change Makers of Color stands for, and that's what I do here and there when I'm not reading comic books. It's a really great way for me to just kind of like reconnect with other people, share some great insight, and build community. That's what this is all about.
And it is fire, y'all. Like, you know, members of the pop cult, we know there is a bunch of you who do some type of service related work, some type of greater good work. If you are not already listening, please do. It is well worth your time. And I personally, I mean, I look out, I like get to benefit from your coaching in real life, but I also get to benefit it through a podcast as well. So thank you for doing it. It's awesome. And thank you for being here. Again, before we jump in, Mike, can you kind of tell us a little bit of your background and your history with X-Men in general? Like, where is X-Men in your hierarchy of love of superheroes and comic books? I'm curious on, you know, what we walking into with your love and admiration for X-Men before we jump in.
So I'm not new to this. I am true to this when it comes to the X-Men. They were the first superheroes that like really kind of spoke to me. So I was the nerdy kid in high school who had shoe boxes full of old comic books up under the bed. Fast forward to today, I'm the grown man who's still wearing like screen T-shirts, like screen tees with all different comic book characters. I mean, look, right, Niels can see right now, but like I rock
That is
cartoons on me
definitely
all the time,
Marvin the Martian.
all the time. So it's always just been like something that I can find bits and pieces of myself in the characters. But then at first it's just cool. Oh, I want to see people fighting on the in this book, and it's fun to read. But then as you get a little bit older, you're like, oh, wait a minute, there's a message going on here. They're talking about
Mm-hmm.
something. And then like now, fast forward, it's like, oh, wait a minute, they always been talking about something. So the X-Men
Yep.
have always been, in my mind, they've been like that. The idea and concept has always been ahead of its time and just like revisiting new stories and new narratives. So it ranks high for me. I still read X-Men every Wednesday when new comics come out. I am reading them. Like it's still a staple of like my literacy and just staple like how I understand the world.
So you're pretty much saying we got a real one with us right now. There we
Day
go.
in, day out.
Love to hear it. And Mike, I gotta say, you also are one of the people that gave me confidence in wearing comic book paraphernalia out here in these streets. You definitely were the one. So thank you for that. I am currently wearing Captain America socks right now as
Yeah.
we speak. And you have a large role in me feeling like I can do that. So thank you. All
No.
right, y'all.
Now you do know that you always wearing. I see you rep DC a lot more than I do, but that's because
Yes.
like you would probably be like the Black Bruce Wayne in my opinion. Just
Hey,
not
I'm
keeping you sleep
definitely
at night.
look. I well, one, thank you, and two, I have always said I am a DC head. Like, how you were like nerding out with X-Men, I was nerding out with Justice League. Like that was just what it was. And it's funny, as I was like slowly like not reading that many comic books, I was kind of like on like my last leg of like, man, you know what? Am I growing out of comic books finally? Until Jonathan Hickman wrote this series.
Yes.
And now, just like you, I'm reading comic books every night, Mike. So, yeah, I don't think I'm growing out of this. But yeah, Pop Call, let's talk about this series. So, first and foremost, spoilers. Like, look, y'all, we are going to spoil the mess out of this book because we have to in order to talk about this. So, let me be very clear. If you even have an inkling of wanting to read one of the best X-Men stories ever, come on back. Like, pause the episode, come on back, go read it. We will be here for you, and we completely understand. If you continue on, just know you can stop at any time because we strongly encourage you to read this series. It's that good. And if you don't, then do not complain. Do not email us saying that we ruined this for you. And in fact, Mike, I honestly believe even with us talking about everything, you're still going to want to go back and read the story. Because you're just like, what? All that went down? So, yes, number
Top
one,
five,
spoilers.
top five, dead or alive.
Facts. I fully agree. All right, so let's give a little bit of background on this. So, first and foremost, it's important to talk about the author himself, Jonathan Hickman. Jonathan Hickman is a longtime comic book writer. He's very famous for his writings with Marvel. A couple of things about Jonathan Hickman. First and foremost, he has one of the best Fantastic Four runs ever. He like really goes in depth talking about Valeria Richards and Franklin Richards, the kids of Susan Storm and Reed Richards. If you've ever like heard stories about Valeria Richards being smarter than Reed and pretty much being like the surrogate niece or daughter of Dr. Doom, that was all Jonathan Hickman. You ever heard stories about Franklin Richards being the strongest mutant ever of all time? That is all Jonathan Hickman. You ever heard stories about the Council of Reeds and like the whole multiverse of Reed Richards? That is all Jonathan Hickman. So he was known for that run of Fantastic Four. He was known for his run with Avengers. I'm actually currently reading that right now because I loved what he did with House and Powers and X so much. I had to go back and read it.
And it's so
That
good.
one, you did
So
you read
good.
all of it, Mike?
You know I did. You know I
It
did.
is so good. It is ridiculous. So, Lord, not supposedly, it ends up turning into Secret Wars. And the crazy thing about Hickman's writing is that all the stories are connected. You could literally just read Jonathan Hickman's writings and it's one whole story. So yes, the Fantastic Four run reads into the Avengers run. The Avengers run reads into House and Powers of X. Like it literally can just be one whole story, which is ridiculous because all of these stories are very, I would say, like the best way I could describe, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, Mike, but the best way I could describe Hickman's writing is like you start at the end, he tells you the ending, and then he tells you how he gets to it. But the way you get there, you don't even expect it to be the way that you got there. Like it is so complicated and smooth at the same time. And like it ends on a cliffhanger every single issue. And it makes you want to read more. Cause he's like, okay, so I answered these 5 questions that you had. But then I just revealed this one big old question. And I'm not going to answer that for like another 3 months. And you're still going to want to be involved. But Mike, what do you think? That was my attempt at describing Hickman's writing.
Well, one, I'm absolutely correct. And then the thing is like you can tell Hickman is like a real comic book like fan, like he is steeped in it because whenever he's doing each of these things, like he dives into like really small details from like really old runs from some of these lines before. So or things that you wouldn't even think that you would bring into it. So when he's doing the Avengers run, like he takes on the beef between Wakanda and Atlantis and
Yep.
weaves it into like, well, now what happened when Thanos is in the mix with that? And like he starts to take that sort of stuff and like tie it all together. Or then like he starts to pull at like Reed Richards got daddy issues. Now, what does that mean for everybody else in the universe? So like he'll take really small pieces from stories that you probably would you if you've been reading comic books, you've read them and then like, okay, this thing was here, and you kind of keep going for the action. But Jonathan Hickman makes a point to like bring it back and like blow it up and then make it like a really big plot device.
You know what? The perfect example of this is the Watchmen TV show. Buddy who David, I think his name is David Lindelof or something. Like the buddy who made the Watchmen TV show. There was one question in Watchmen, which is like, what is the identity? We never got to know the identity of Hooded Justice. He took that one mystery and made a TV show off of it. And was like, what if Hooded Justice was black? That is what Jonathan Hickman is for comic book writing. He takes
Every
that
time.
one little nugget and is like, well, let me just make a dope story off of that question that's not really answered. Yeah, so that's thank you, Mike. That is a great way to describe it. So the other piece of this is X-Men. If you're a member of the pop cult, I feel like I'm gonna sound condescending, but I should just say this anyway. The X-Men is one of like the most legendary superhero teams ever. Period. The X-Men, I will say, besides Spider-Man, and I mean it even surpasses Spider-Man in my opinion. In like the history of Marvel, it's the best-selling comic books that they've ever had. If you have X associated with anything, whether it's a Wolverine run, whether it's New Mutants, whether it is anything X-Men, whether it's X-Men Red, X-Men Gold, like Uncanny X-Men, anything in front of X-Men, like it's some of the best selling comic books that Marvel has. It took a dip several years because Marvel's, always had iffy issues with their Sony owned and Fox owned properties. And then they got them all back. And needless to say, they were like, okay, we got all this property back. Let's hire Jonathan Hickman to take over X-Men. And there you have House and Power of X. I'm going to give a very, well, Mike, you're probably going to have to reel me in because I'm going to try to give context for the story and then we're going to dive into the story.
I got you.
And as you know, Mike, I love this series and I love to nerd out. So feel free to reel me in. You have managed me before. One of the best bosses I've ever had. I will not be offended, even though this is my podcast. Please, please. So you just heard the writer and you just heard the context of, the one of the most legendary comic book series ever. So House and Power of X essentially is what if Professor X and Magneto both disregarded their dreams to come together and blaze a trail for a new future of mutants on Earth. Like, came together, and not like on some temporary, there's this bigger evil threat that we have to come together temporarily just to defeat it and separate again, which we've, seen time and time again with Magneto and Professor X. This is like, no, we are casting our ideals away and we are coming together to blaze a trail for something we have never done before, because it's the only way we think mutants can survive. And that turns into pretty much the mutants creating their own country on the island of Krakoa, which, oh, Lord have mercy, we got to talk about Krakoa. And the fact that, like, it wasn't like giant-sized X-Men, which was like, I don't know how long ago. I wasn't born then. It was a long time ago. And so the House and Power of X is really two stories. It is the journey that mutants do to create their own country and all they had to do in order to make that happen. And at the same time, it tells the story of the reason why they feel like this was the only way to go, because it talks about the other timelines on what happens when Professor X fully like embraces his ideals, or Magneto has all of his ideals go forward, or Apocalypse has all his ideas going. And like, all of this is rooted in one character, which is Myra McTaggart, someone who has been in the X-Men world for as long as I've been reading. I've always knew her as, like, I always thought it was Banshee's girlfriend. I always thought she was old girl on Muir Island who was like, oh, you're having issue with your powers. Don't stay in the mansion. Come hang out with me for about 3 months and you're as good as new. Go back over there and you're straight. Or the person constantly telling Jean, like, Jean, something's wrong with you. I don't know what's wrong with you, but something's wrong with you. Later, you find out it's the Phoenix Force. So, like, yeah, that is Myra McTaggart. Okay, Mike, I'm gonna pause.
I was about to say, she's probably one of the most, up until this, like, been one of the most, like, insignificant characters in the grand scheme of X-Men. And she's always been a human, but been like a mutant sympathizer. But then what Jonathan Hickman did with this one, like, he just took that one character, and by flipping her just a little bit, like, was able to like create a whole new thing. So in this, like, he, instead of Myra being a human, the idea is like, well, what if she was a mutant? And then gave her this really interesting but very specific power. And that it was to, whenever she dies, she resets the timeline. So like a really weird Groundhog's Day, if you will. Really weird Groundhog's Day.
She resets it with all of her memories still intact of her previous lives. So she is starting her life over, but remembers everything that occurred in all of her previous lives, carrying that knowledge with her. So it's like, it is like an advanced version of reincarnation, because she knows exactly what she went through. All that memory is still retained in her. Now, Mike, before we like kind of go crazy with this, has there ever been an answer to like why Myra has been, for her being like a human around all these mutants, has there ever been a rationale with why she has been around mutants this whole time?
Well, yeah, in the comic books, she went to college with Professor X.
Yeah,
So
Oxford.
they knew each other from like early on, and then became a sympathizer in some stretches. Sometimes like Magneto is also around, like ends up around that phase in life, like getting to know Professor X. So her proximity to mutants early on becomes a thing. And then later on, her son actually is a mutant. Her son, Proteus. So Proteus is like one of them wild, like one of them characters who could do like a whole bunch of crazy stuff and make everything around to do whatever he wanted to do. All that sort of reality warping. So so mutants play an important role in her life, but like her as a character, it was always just like she was always just like, she jumps into a scene here, she's maybe trying to help them do some research here, but like there's not been much that like really dived into her as a character and her motivations. So she was always in the background.
It's always crazy that nobody asked the question. Like, her son was like a freakishly powerful mutant. And nobody was like, huh, where did this, like, typically you're like a ridiculously powerful mutant. You probably came from a powerful mutant, you know what I'm saying? At least from my Mr. Sinister research. Like, it just seems like that's what the science is in the X-Men universe, but no one has questioned it. And to your point, Mike, Jonathan Hickman took that one thing and was like, what if Myra McTaggart was a mutant? And so in House of Powers of X, well, in Powers of X in particular, we see Myra go through the journey of 10 different lives. 10 different lives. And in each life, it shows Myra making a decision for like what she should do in proximity to mutants. I think for the first one, she lived a regular life. And this is all straight off the dome, Mike, so feel free to jump in. The first one, she lived a regular life. The second one, she came back and realized something's up with her. And she finally realizes that her classmate exposes mutants. She's like, oh, I'm a mutant. She goes, tries to find Professor X, passes away in a car crash. The third life, she finally gets with Professor X. And that's like the normal timeline that we're aware of, like her being cool with Professor X, and Days of Future Past happens and they're all killed by Sentinels. And then the fourth one, she's like, oh, hell nah, let me get Professor X early. They try to have their own little island. Sentinels come and raid that. Man, I'm actually impressing myself with what
I was about to say, you doing good right now. I didn't even stop you.
Shoot. Okay, so the fifth one, I think at that point she gets radicalized and she probably goes with Magneto.
Yep.
And she's like, this ain't gonna work out. We can't be, ain't no dream of us living together in harmony with them. We gotta go crazy. And knowing Magneto, even though I just read the words and saw like a scene, but knowing Magneto was probably like, say less. They can all get it.
Jump on me, I'll get the jump on them. Go.
Say less. He's like, we can go right now. And that's exactly what they did. And then I think it read, it was like, not just the X-Men, but all the Avengers all came together to take him down.
Which, can we just, I'm going to make this a Magneto stand moment later on, but it is coming. But that goes to show you.
Magneto ain't nothing to play with. So we learn about the sixth one like several issues later. But the sixth one, essentially, Myra is cool with Apocalypse. And she's like, I'm just going to like align with Apocalypse. She awakens him. And he's like, cool, I'm going to get my 4 horsemen. We're now the X-Men. If you ain't with me, then you're weak. Because, he's all about strongest, like only the strong survive. So if you ain't with me, you weak. And they fast forward. No, that's not the sixth one. That's like the seventh one. Whatever. I'll keep talking about this one. So she aligns with Apocalypse. They go all the way to the future, and Apocalypse's sole mission is to give Myra enough information about Nimrod and Omega Sentinels so she can take that information and go back in time to carry that with her to make sure that, humans can't, mess them up.
Yeah, she even tried at one point to kill the guy who invented Sentinels with
Bolivar Trask. Yep.
Killed him, killed all his kids, killed his cousins, killed anybody who could even know anything about that. And that still didn't work.
Yeah, and what baffled me, and Mike, actually, this is a question to have for you. That kind of baffled me. So, like, Sentinels, if you're familiar with X-Men, you're familiar with like the pivotal role that Sentinels play. And if you're familiar with Sentinels, you're familiar with Bolivar Trask and like the entire Trask family. Anytime something Sentinel related happens, it's a Trask involved and they out here killing folks. What kind of baffled me with reading about that life was that Sentinels is like a natural reaction to humans when they encounter mutants. Like, when humans interact with mutants, the next iteration is them building Sentinels because they cannot take the fact that they are not the next step of evolution. Like, Mike, when you read that, have you ever heard of Sentinels being an absolute without a Trask involved in your reading?
Yeah, so it's like when they did this one, they kind of they're lumping like Sentinels and AI together. And like
Mm.
AI is like the next, like AI is always going to be the next logical step. But yeah, like it in all the like in all the X-Men readings, like eventually it's some form of like like some sort of persecution that X-Men are under. Like there's usually you have to have some you just a normal person ain't going if you just got like your hands in fish, you're not gonna win a fight against Wolverine. You have to build something to be able to counteract that, right? So like then that's when but what that's when like you started seeing some of the characters are like they start having like cyborgs, right? So like now you start getting
Mm-hmm.
people experimenting on humans, and now they're trying to get into like nano robots and all that stuff. So like the idea of technology being humans' way to fight back against mutants, and like that's their form of evolution was also like the other little thread that was happening. So when when Jonathan Hickman wrote this, and again, like this man was amazing in how he did this. Like one, he's writing the story House of X, right? At the same time, he's also writing Powers of X or Powers of 10, however you're supposed to say it. And
Mm-hmm.
so he's also like telling you like this is what's happening in the future because of this story. So it's almost like watching this week's episode of a show, but then you're also watching next season's episode like directly after. And so they talk about like years down the line,
Like thousands of years.
thousands of years,
Yes.
the Earth is gonna come to a big calamity where all these big super crazy machines do all this stuff. Why? Because humans were so like they were try to fight mutants so much with technology that it just spirals into something completely different that nobody could actually beat.
And at this point, we're probably, if you're familiar with X-Men, you've probably seen about 2 or 3 different dystopian futures in regards to X-Men. Like you've seen, of course, Days of Future Past, you've seen stuff with Bishop, and you've seen stuff with Cable. You probably seen like a Nimrod before because like those are the enemies. But you ain't never seen 1,000 years in the future. You know what I'm saying? Like, so I can only imagine, like, hold up, what is going on here for like folks who are like X-Men stands. So eventually, Mara, after like living all of these lives where she's seen, what happens when she aligns with Professor X multiple times, aligns with Magneto, aligns with Apocalypse, and just straight up to Mike's point, just tries to stay as alive for as long as possible to see what happens. And that ends up being like 990 years in the future. And she sees that like humans actually combine themselves with technology to become like the next step of evolution. So we are always assuming that X-Men are like the evolved state of humans and they're like the benefactors of the world. But humans are so bent out of shape about mutants that they combine themselves with technology and become another evolved species. I think they're like Homo numer. Why am I trying to say what this is? They become machine people under
Machine
blue.
people.
And they eventually like you know what? I ain't even gonna tell you all this. It's just the phallics are involved. They become a hive mind. And Myra's like, okay, what I've realized from living these 9 lives is that the mutants always lose. We either lose to the humans, we lose to Sentinels, or we lose to like some evolved AI species. But like we lose every single time until her 10th life, where she's like, I need to try something different. And that is Professor X. Like, I need to kill his dream. Because what I've realized, and Mike, tell me if I'm wrong in all of this, it's that the constant is that Professor X always has hope that humans and mutants can live together in harmony. She supports his dreams and it doesn't work. She aligns herself with other people and Professor X tries to stop them. And like even Magneto, anytime he's trying to do something by himself, Professor X is always there to try to stop them because His goal is for humans and mutants to live together in harmony. Until this life, where Mara's like, I need to kill his dream because that's not going to happen. Has that ever happened before? Am I tripping, or is that the case?
It's never happened on this kind of scale. Like whenever the X-Men when they're off to the side, so like there's one time they were living in this place called Utopia. They had like their own little island over near San Francisco. Or when they're out at like Westchester and they have like these little remote locations. Or even at one time they were out in Australia. I think that was like back in the 80s or 90s, like the Siege Perilous stuff. But whenever they kind of like, oh, we're going to go all away from everybody else and do our own thing, it's always been short periods of time. And it's usually been like directly because some sort of threat happened and they need to regroup. But the idea of like, nah, we're not engaging with humanity overall. Like that's never been a thing before. And then not even just the X-Men not doing that, but like this is also the first time this comic book is different because it's the first time mutant kind has all moved in the same way. So for the longest, when they're writing this, like whenever you talk about the X-Men, you're talking like this is Professor X, like it's the squad out of the school. Like it's Cyclops, it's whoever the field team is. Like that is usually it's like maybe a roster of like 6 to 10 people. At one time, that group is the X-Men. But there's mutants all over the world, and they're not all considered X-Men. This is the first time, like for the longest, they were writing as he's writing this, he's like mutant kind. All these people have all been experiencing all this stuff, and now everybody's going to one place, and everybody's moving under the same umbrella. So like that's a whole shift all in itself.
And we're still building context here. So you hear about Myra Taggart and all her lives. That's how she convinces Professor X to like kill his dream about them living in harmony. They get cool with Magneto and convince them to get together. But at this point, a couple of things have still happened. You still have Genosha existing and Cassandra Nova coming through with the Sentinels killing 16 million mutants. You still have House of M happening and Scarlet Witch depowering over 1 million mutants. Like you still have all of those things happening, and you still have like them repopulating the mutants and them coming back with and Hope Summer still existing. Like all that stuff that you have read about still happens going into this timeline and going into the fact that like Professor X and Magneto come together. So like, even if you didn't read any of these X-Men books, just imagine this. This is 1997. You're watching your favorite TV show, X-Men, the animated series on Fox. Just imagine them all of a sudden, Professor X and Magneto, like, you know what? We don't trust humans no more. We're coming together and we're going to partner with Apocalypse, Mr. Sinister, the Hellfire Club, damn near every villain on the history of the planet.
Like,
to create
you got real beef
with beef. I mean, some of them have killed y'all. Yeah. and y'all are coming together to create a country. And Professor X straight up makes like a claim, like he was like, number one, first of all, I don't think I've ever in my nerddom life heard Professor X talk that bold and that clear with that many flames in any speech ever. And this man was voiced by Patrick Stewart in several movies. That man was captain of a Starfleet, and I still never heard flames like that before. And he was like, in the past, I would have offered these gifts, which we're going to talk about later, as a gift. But like, y'all have showed me that y'all don't want us. Y'all don't want to live with us. And you know what? So this is not a gift anymore. Y'all going to have to pay for this. And like, you will only get this if you acknowledge that we are a country and you give us sovereignty of a country and like, leave us alone, because while y'all were sleeping, the earth changed. We're the future. This is our planet, but we're not even asking for the planet. We're asking for this little area right here. And if you come for us, you will feel the fire. Like, I have never heard Professor X talk like that before. So
Like
it was got me hyped.
you could tell he was hanging out with Magneto for a minute because like you could see like as he's doing this speech, Magneto just sitting there like, yeah, that's my boy, that's my boy. And then of course, when Magneto gets to talking, he letting it be known too. He telling everybody like, put some respect on our names because like it ain't just me. It ain't. It's not just Magneto no more. That's about it. That like every mutant is willing to do the same thing that he would do. So you can't step sideways with them no more.
So that is all the context for the going into the comic book.
That's just the
So
context.
Mike, that is the context. So Mike, is there anything in particular about Krakoa that you want to spend some time on and talk about? We're going to get to all of it, but what in particular did you want to start with?
I think we should talk about their big state secret and like the one of the things that makes Krakoa amazing. I mean, because it's a comic book, they could do this. But the one of the things I really liked is like they started talking about that. Like, so technology ends up being it's a thread in all this, right? So they start talking
Yeah.
about how when they use every mutant has different powers, right? But then when they use certain powers together, they create what they call a mutant circuit. So like the idea is like to like individually, Magneto can bend metal, right? But what happens if you put Magneto together with like a couple other people? Like now the things that they could be able to do if they're working in harmony is like amazing. Like one of the things they talk about later on is like Magneto, Storm, Iceman, and like
Iceman.
who else was in that mix? Jean Grey. They pulled all their heavy hitters together and they literally terraform Mars like as a unit, as a clique.
The
Like
planet.
they
Not just
terraform a whole planet.
not just a certain section of Mars, which Jonathan Hickman has done several times, and like several other authors have done several times. Not just the dark side of the moon. They terraformed the entire planet and they asked for permission
Right. And said it's
from no
ours
one.
now. They said it's ours now. And they did it during the dinner party where everybody was watching. Just like, oh, look what we do. Big
The
flip.
Hellfire Gala. Just imagine if you were at a nonprofit gala and the folks there were like, "Oh, by the way, our head honcho is going to speak to your mind and show you a vision of us terraforming an entire planet, and now we're saying it's ours, and y'all can't do nothing about it.
Like they do
Thank
that
you.
kind of
Your donations can go over here. Thank you.
pay in full, please. For the full fiscal year. But
Yes.
but they did the one thing that they do as a mutant circuit that's really cool is the five. So there's five mutants, and like together they're actually able to like bring people back to life, and it's a really interesting concept about how like it's what makes Krakoa. It's one of the secret ingredients that like really makes this story like so compelling.
Yes. So let's talk about the five. So I don't remember all the characters, but one thing a question I did have for you is they were all actual mutants before this story, right? Like he didn't make new characters. Those were all just characters that existed, right?
Yeah, and these were characters that Jonathan Hickman did not create. So like one of them, his name is Gold Balls. It's a
Yes.
really weird name. But like I think this came out in I can't remember who was writing this run on Uncanny X-Men, but he can create these gold orbs that he just like propels to people like projectiles. And nobody ever
It's
thought
probably
nothing
Grant
about
Morrison. Knowing who Grant Morrison is, that sounds like a Grant Morrison thing.
it was so Grant Morrison did him, and then the other one was Tempest. She kind of like time warping stuff. She ain't like a
Mm.
full fledged time traveler, but like she manipulates time in some sort of degree. But these were and then Elixir was way beforehand, and then Proteus, the son of Moira McTaggart, that was whew, he was made a while back. So
He was a
these are
while back. Yeah.
and then Hope Summers. So like these are characters that all came from different time periods in like the X-Men universe.
So I think so Mike shared it, but like essentially, when these five mutants bring their powers together, some of those powers like gold balls, like the man just made gold balls. They later like tell you the significance of the gold balls and how his powers interact with this powers and hope, having them all work together, they are able to essentially bring people back from the dead. With of course Professor X like leveraging his intelligence. Mr. Sinister's involved. Like, it's crazy to think about this, but it really shows you, I think what it is a microcosm of when the mutants work together, they can do anything. Like, and they can bring people back from the dead if they are working together. And so, like, part of the reason this was a significant aspect of the story is because the mutants are constantly trying to, like, stop those other potential futures from happening. So, like, they're trying to stop Sentinels to becoming Master Molds, to becoming Mother Molds, to becoming Nimrod. If you don't understand anything I'm saying, it's absolutely fine. They don't want to make very complex machines because machines lead to
People
no
dying.
more mutants. Yes. So I think, Mike, if you could, I'm gonna bring anime in this because I think we should talk about the significance of Sentinels. Because especially if you only grew up watching the X-Men cartoon, you probably don't know how much of a big deal Sentinels are. Like, yeah, they're like big killing machines, but like you may not get it. So, like, I have an analogy, and tell me if this makes sense. Okay. I'm gonna combine anime in this. To me, the Sentinels are like the Titans from Attack on Titans. So
Mm.
if you're really good, like if you're a really good mutant, you can probably take down one Sentinel by yourself. Like if you're like an Ackerman, like if you're like Storm can probably take down a Sentinel by herself. Cyclops on a good day can probably take a Sentinel down by himself. If you're like a legend, you can maybe take down two Sentinels by yourself. You know what I'm saying? Like Magneto can probably take down two Sentinels by himself. Almost no one can take down three by themselves. I mean, you got to be like, I don't know, Legion, somebody ridiculous. Like somebody is just like OD, Franklin Richards. You got to be like, you could take down three Sentinels by yourself. The issue with a master mold and a mother mold is that they're making Sentinels nonstop. Like those machines that are making machines that are making machines that make Sentinels make it so much that like it would be 100 Sentinels to one mutant. And I don't care who you are, you're not beating 100 Sentinels by yourself. So, like, I think to me, that was what helped me realize how much of a big deal it was for the X-Men to stop master molds getting made because, like, they had to stop a machine that was capable of making so many Sentinels that, like, enough mutants couldn't beat them. Did that make so? Tell me if that makes sense.
It totally makes sense because it's like mutants eventually get tired, and like if you are going to constantly, like Storm can take a Sentinel, boom. But then like if they just keep coming and keep coming, sooner or later you will falter. And like the idea of like the master molds and the mother molds eventually, like those are ones that like now they can come at you too, but then now they created them and created them. And I think it was like master molds will create these sentinels, which is like the front lines, right? But then
Yeah.
mother mode can create other master modes. So like when you start thinking about like machine hierarchy and stuff, then it's like, yo, like what you gonna do against all of that?
Yeah, yeah. So, needless to say, the they like the mutants really needed to do everything they can to like stop that from happening, which meant that some of them had to die in order for those efforts to happen, which made the five so significant in this run because if you have the power to bring folks back, then like you can it just makes the story that much more dynamic because it's like this person can really risk their life for the cause, knowing that like them as an idea is enough for them to come back. That is mind boggling. Mind boggling. Okay, so that's the five. I want to go to Krakoa itself. What are your thoughts on both the island and the plants, Mike?
Yo, so one, I I love plants. I'm a plant dad. I'm on the side, with the plants
I
behind
see
me.
the plant right there.
But so Krakoa goes back to what was that? That
Giant
was
size
Giant Size,
X-Men.
Giant
Yep.
Size X-Men. And so it was like this. like sentient. It was like the if the land was sort of alive, like kind of monster looking thing. And then nobody really referenced it again ever since. And that's like in the 70s. It maybe popped up like once or twice, but this was a whole different thing. So like Jonathan Hickman brings back Krakoa, but brings back Krakoa as like Krakoa is an actual mutant. So like imagine if an island had sentience and it was a mutant in itself. That's the thing. Like that's like, oh whoa, what's going on there? And again, this idea of like mutants working together, creating something like Krakoa can be able to create certain type of plants and like that being really awesome. But in return, like Krakoa actually needs to feed off of mutant energy. So, the thing that Professor X can say, like, yo, what if I bring all the mutants over here? You get enough energy, they don't even bother us, but now we got our own little land. Like that became like a real like that's a real cool way to think about how you working with them. And then the plant situation is just like it's next level. It's like, well, with people when you got people doing superpowers, why aren't they solving cancer? Why aren't they solving world hunger? And like they actually take a swing at that, like, oh yeah, mutants actually could do some of that. But like you said before, like, we ain't doing nothing for free for y'all because y'all don't really love us. So like if you do want some of these plants that can cure Alzheimer's, that can add on to your life expectancy for 10 years, that can cure dementia, that can cure the flu. You want all that stuff? It's gonna cost you
Money.
money.
And the way Professor X does it, he a couple months before he even mentions Krakoa, he starts to buy all these shell companies and all these pharmaceutical companies. Everybody's like, why is Xavier doing all this stuff? And then next thing you know, he's like, oh yeah, so we got these drugs that can do all these things for humans. So this is for y'all. And you can have it and you'll want it and you gotta pay for it. And that ends up being the chief export for Krakoa. So this country that did not exist now automatically can become one of the wealthiest countries on the planet because they have something that no one else can produce.
Like it's built in monopoly, built in military, all in there. Cause like, what you gonna do when Magneto come out to the front steps? Like
Nothing. Nothing. You're going
OP.
to I'm on your side, Magneto. I
but
don't
but
want those problems.
one thing I say was funny though, like so in the comic they also talk about like how like eventually most of the countries folded and they took the Krakoan drugs. One
Mhm.
country that said like no, Wakanda. Wakanda said, and
Wakanda.
they said why? Wakanda said we do not need mutant drugs. Like very clear, like we're good.
And then I think there was like 2 or 3 other countries that were also in Africa, and they were like, "We are protected by Wakanda." So it's
Period.
like we don't need y'all because Wakanda got us. That also shows you how bold. Because like, I mean, they talk about it later on in the stories, but like, your queen was Storm. So like, wow, that was a bold statement. But you also realize like they actually don't have beef with Krakoa, but they also are like, it's the same issue with T'Challa and Storm's marriage in general, which is like there is an absolute trust. Yeah, there is an absolute trust, and that's it's not gonna work out well because Storm is gonna be like mutants first, everybody else second, and T'Challa been on the Wakanda first, everybody else second. So it gets a little tricky for them. Okay, so and just to name a little bit about Krakoa from Giant Size X-Men, like that was the first appearance of Storm, of Wolverine, of my boy. Why am I forgetting my favorite character's name from Russia?
Oh, Colossus.
Colossus. How I forget your name, Colossus? I'm sorry, brother. They went to go save the former X-Men that were on Krakoa because Krakoa was sapping their energy. So, like what Mike shared earlier is like Professor X came and realized, oh, you're a mutant, number one. And number two, you really need energy. If we live on you, no one will feel like they're getting any energy sucked out because we'll all be here and you'll get everything you need. So he strikes a deal with the mutant sentient villain from Giant Size X-Men, and all of a sudden they have a land to live on. Mind
Diplomacy.
boggling. So the other thing I want to talk to you about, Mike, is we mentioned Apocalypse, we mentioned Mr. Sinister, we mentioned the Hellfire Club. let's talk about the Quiet Council. So we mentioned all these folks, and we mentioned how they're involved in like pivotal in the role of this country existing. Mike, can you give us the significance of these characters and how this Quiet Council is like such a game changing philosophy in the world of X-Men?
Oh yeah. Before I do, I just got to go back 1 second because you talked about. I think one of the best things Jonathan Hickman did was he got his hands on Mister Sinister. So if you remember Mister Sinister from the X Men animated series, he had like the sharpened fangs and
Yep.
like real scary, right? Whereas this one, he's like a comical, almost serial killer sort of personality where he's joking and dancing while talking about killing people, but makes for an amazing read. But then the best part is so he Jonathan Hickman does these data pages. So these pages where it's a less pictures, but more just like kind of giving you some story. But one that he
Yep.
did is Bar Sinister. So
Oh yes.
so yo,
Yep.
it's
I
like
forgot about those.
stroke of genius. It's like imagine if you put the Shade Room into a comic book, but you didn't tell everybody what the room like the who the rumor was. So it's Mr. Sinister telling you the rumors about what is happening on Krakoa, but he doesn't tell you who it is about. So it's almost like a riddle. So he's like, what person with who's over 1,000 years old is dying to get back to see their kids, but his kids are dying, or want to see him die, and it's about apocalypse, but it's like a
and
thing
it's
for later.
and it that's the crazy thing. Like the rumors that he's telling you are like 6 months down the road.
Right, like because Jonathan Hickman had it all mapped out. So he's like, "Oh, I'm gonna tell you this," and now you're sitting here wondering. He said something like, "Well, which redhead is going to make a return?" And now you're like, "Wait a minute, which redhead could it be?" And now you're
You know how
waiting
many
3 months.
redheads are in Marvel?
But Mr. Sinister is amazing. But
Yes.
the Quiet Council is probably just as glorious because you have all of these you have these characters. You have Jean Grey, you have Storm, you have Emma Frost, Sebastian Shaw, Mystique, Apocalypse, Magneto, Professor X, all having to sit at a table and like, well, what are we going to do about this or this? And like again, to what you said, Neil's like some of these people like they killed each other, like they was going for like war, and like now they got to sit here and like go back and forth. So like to see when Mystique starts having some beef with Professor X, like how does that shape? But then like what happens when Storm Storm going to be honest and straight up, but then Sebastian Shaw is like, I'm all about the money. So if this don't make us no money, then what's gonna go? Like it ended up becoming so compelling that eventually the folks writing this, like it bore a whole new series. So now there's a series just about the Quiet Council members because of how interesting that is. And they're calling it Immortal X-Men.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Mike. You just added something to my list.
Oh
All
yeah.
right. Say less. So is it pretty much like Congress? It's like X-Men Congress.
There it is. There, but then that's exactly it. And every episode is like focused on a different character and like what they got
Mm-hmm.
going on. So then like if AOC is she's beefing with Mitch McConnell, but then
Mm-hmm.
like what happens behind the scenes, and now she's preparing for what's going to happen next. But then somebody like tries to lock the room door or something like that. You know what I mean? Like that sort of stuff. Like it's so cool. It's so
Is
cool.
it okay? We kind of got a sneak of that in Inferno when Mystique was like, if I want this to happen, I gotta convince so and so. I gotta convince Emma Frost to do this. I gotta convince Sinister to do this. Is it like that? Except a series?
Yeah, that. But then the last part about that one, like it's that happening, but then so Destiny comes back, right? So and Destiny
Mhm.
is for folks who don't know, that's Mystique's longtime wife, lover. She's blind but can see the future, and so Destiny's back on the council, and now but she realizes that Mister Sinister has been scheming real heavy. So now Destiny like can see like, oh wait a minute, there's about to be a whole bunch of stuff that goes really bad, and Sinister is at the middle of it. And so now it's this big cat and mouse game between Sinister and Destiny that the rest of the council doesn't know anything about. But they're all still going through and doing this stuff. But them two is like going back and forth, and it's so dope. You would never have seen it's two villains, two quote unquote villains are the people like going back and forth and like having this fight, and everybody else is kind of like in the prop and in the back.
Yeah, Mike, that was a great trailer. Marvel should pay you some money for that.
I mean,
because I've read a lot of comic book. You sold that sucker. I'm reading that right after this.
You will love it.
So I think some of the interesting things about like the Quiet Council is, in particular, how did Magneto and Professor X convince all of these folks to come together? There's only a few that I want to talk about: Apocalypse, Sinister, and Emma Frost. I'll dabble in Apocalypse, but I want you to comment on all of them. So I like what made me I was in love with this book like after the first episode, but when they convinced Apocalypse to come there, I knew I was reading something special. Cause like it really made me think. So they were like, Apocalypse, look, if you come into this island, Magneto's like, we don't want no problems. Wolverine was at the front, like, I will kill you, bruh. I know you're immortal, but I will kill you. I will find a way. We ain't gonna have no problems on this island. Like, this is for us. And Apocalypse was like, y'all clearly don't understand me. This is everything I've ever wanted from you all. Like, all I've ever wanted was for you all to realize that you were better than them, that you are like capable of greatness and this planet is yours. And you all are now finally taking your seat on the throne. He's like, I couldn't be any more prouder of you all. Like, of course I'll be here. Of course I'll support this happening. And I was like, nah. And then I thought about it. I was like, no, that's literally what Apocalypse has always been about. He's been about like, we are superior than them. We need to show that we are superior to them. And this is just a modern way of showing that they are superior than humans. And so I sat down real dumb, Mike. I sat down real dumb for like 5 minutes, like, nah. But I was like, nah, that's literally what he wants. Like, that's all he's ever wanted. So yeah, how'd you feel when you read that scene?
It was like Apocalypse coming through and like the proud dad, like, yeah, this is how y'all supposed to be. Like they've never had anything like this before. Like, and then you go a little bit further into the scene, right? So like now he's like one of the heads of state. If you on the Great Council, you're on the head of state. And they had a couple of high-ranking people as like they call them like the captains, right? So like this like hit school, like these are like the top bodyguards. They got like Bishop, they got Magic, they got Gorgon, which Gorgon is an amazingly dope character. Right? Like wouldn't even remember nothing about before Jonathan Hickman brought him back.
Yes, sir.
So
yes, sir.
So picture this.
And Cyclops leads them all.
And Cyclops leads them all. And like they doing like they do this mission to go talk to some humans. It's Apocalypse, Professor X, and Magneto. And they got Cyclops and Gorgon as the bodyguards. Cyclops is the bodyguard to the man who tried to kill him, who infected his son, and like his son had to go get raised in the future because this man tried to kill him and tried to take his cells and all this wild stuff. But like they can be able to put all that aside because it's like, yo, everybody, like it's mutants over everybody. Like that idea is like bananas, but like
bananas.
It's so compelling.
That was a great issue, by the way, what you just described. Like one other thing I would say about this is like, yo, justice for Cyclops. Because Cyclops, I mean, you know, Mike, Cyclops, his stock was going down, brother. Oh. It was going low. It was going mighty low, not just in comics, but in film as well. Like every iteration with Cyclops was just seen like as lame and as a loser and getting punked by Wolverine. And then Jonathan Hickman, skyrocketed him back up. Cyclops is the man. He is the right man. He's supposed to be. Yeah. He is right back at the tippy top, man. He's one of the most compelling characters in this entire run. You're constantly cheering for him and you believe him. And he is, I mean, I'll say he's one of the best leaders. I don't think anybody beating Storm, but I'm a little biased, as you know.
Fair.
But like, just very compelling. Okay, so that was Apocalypse. I think the other one is Sinister.
Yeah.
Sinister, pretty much, Magneto and Professor X were like, we know that you want to collect all the DNA samples from mutants and you want to do some wild stuff with it. You can do that. Do it on the island and make sure you get every single mutant's DNA. We later find out that's to help the Five do their thing. But like, what was your reaction to that? Especially knowing that you saw the future lives where that turned around and like messed everything up for all the mutants. So like, what was your reaction to Sinister joining the Quiet Council and like just your thoughts in general about Sinister?
Yeah. Well, again, like his character was super compelling in this one. I really like reading it, even though at the same time you knew. And so what Myra was telling Professor X and Magneto was like, don't trust Sinister because he gonna do y'all wrong whenever he can. And that was one of the first points where they're like, yeah, we know you lived your lives before, but we're gonna do this thing our way. And they actually went against her wishes. And like that was like so also what's happening in the back of this, like Myra's actually manipulating everybody based on what she knows. And so she's trying to move them like chess pieces. But he's the first example of like a instance where like Professor X and Magneto, like, nah, you're not, we gonna move on how we see fit. And like that was a little bit of a rub for her. But like bringing him into the mix, like now he starts have like, of course he got his ulterior motives, and like as you watch him throughout, he's slowly starting to figure out like how can I make Krakoa do what I wanted to do. He even gets his own team. So what I also loved about this book, this series overall, it then launched Jonathan Hickman into almost doing like an X universe. So then after
Yeah.
House and Powers, there he had the X-Men line, but then he had Marauders, has Fallen Angels, has X-Force, has Excalibur. So all of the X lines all reset after this. One of the books that came out of that was Hellions. So imagine if Mr. Sinister was like the Professor X figure for a team of mutants. So, but it's the team of misfits. So you have Alex Summers who's going through mental health issues. You have Psylocke who wants to kill everybody and is really annoyed with everyone. You got
That
Nancy and
sounds on
Monster
brand.
Maker. Right. You get all the ones that should not be on a team, but they become a team. And like now, Mr. Sinister is feeding them missions, and you know there's some ulterior motive going on. But it was so good. It was so good.
I might need to read that one. I highly recommend Marauders. I love Marauders was
Oh, it
so
was so good,
good.
so good.
Sebastian Shaw is a terrible person. Just a horrible, horrible individual who deserved everything he got.
Oh, and
Um
yes, underline, yes, and then
And
some.
then the other one, X Force. I loved X Force. Later on, there is so I'm reading one now, which is X-Men Red, which there's so like I can't even really because I gotta explain Mars. Then I gotta explain
Yeah.
Akora, and
Oh,
then we gotta explain X Swords. Like good, I
it's
can't
so
even do
much.
all
But
that.
once you in it, you can't get out.
Needless to like everything Mike and I are just naming are books and stories that happen like a series or two after House and Powers of X. But it is so good, you're gonna want to read it. You're gonna want to read it anyway. The last one I have, unless you have any other ones, is Emma Frost. Emma Frost. So if if X-Men, if Professor X and Magneto coming together were the two most important things to happen and them getting Apocalypse on their side, I would say the next most important person was Emma Frost. And it's not because Emma Frost is just like a ridiculously strong telepath. And you always need a lot of strong telepaths in anything mutant related. They already got Jean Grey, but there's three ridiculously strong telepaths just on the Quiet Castle, Mike. I don't know if you realize that. Like this is ridiculous. They got like there's only two Jokers. They got like four Jokers in the Quiet Council. It's
And all
ridiculous.
the aces.
And all the aces. Like, come on now. There's like 5 Omega level mutants on like a table of 12. Like, what are we doing out here? It's ridiculous. Anyway, I digress. So Emma, they didn't get Emma for her powers. They got Emma because she's a savvy businesswoman.
Yeah.
And they're like, we need to be rich, and we need you to sell these drugs to folks and to manage the business. And she said, if you cut the check, say less. And on the other
Literally.
side, and you can maybe say more to this, Mike. Emma is like a compelling character in Marvel history. Like, she's been the leader of the X-Men. She's led schools. She's also been some of their biggest like villains. The Hellfire Club has always been like in some way, shape, or form. Of course, it was paramount in the Dark Phoenix saga, but like Hellfire's always been around as something New Mutants or some like Gen X or something. Like, there's always been some issues with Emma or
Mhm.
Hellfire and mutants. So, like, can you kind of just like help us understand more the significance of Emma being a part of this?
Oh yeah. So at one point in time, like Emma was the villain, and then she went through like that transformational arc, and now she became a full-time member of the X-Men. She was also a little scandalous because her and Scott Summers were together for a few years, and
Ah,
that happened after Jean Grey might have caught them and all this and that, so whew,
oh,
drama. But
so that's why they don't like each other. That explains
yeah,
it. That explains it.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. A telepathical affair is still an affair, as we find out in the comic books. What was interesting about like so again, you called it like her as a businesswoman is what like is like her big flex. So coming in, she's the one who sets up like the Hellfire Corporation, and so handling like how drugs are distributed out. But then there's also like drugs being smuggled in. So like, well, some places aren't going to want to take our drugs, so let's get them smuggled into these places. So that way people will start to like the demand for them will grow, and that will be how we overcome like these governments not accepting our drugs. But then the other piece, I think the big contribute one of the big contributions Emma makes through this is like she prompts Krakoa to bring back the Hellfire Gala. So the Hellfire Gala in the comic books, so the Hellfire Club, this secret society, eventually mutants kind of like end up running in those circles. So it's their big gala where they want to be fancy and be awesome. So what she does with it now, though, is like this a gala just to celebrate mutant kind. So they invite Iron Man, you inviting Captain America, you inviting like the President of the United States, come to the mutant gala, and and we told you about that big flex they did when they terraformed the planet. But what was real interesting for the readers, I don't know if you remember this, Niels, you start seeing all this comic book art pop up about these variant covers of people in their looks for the gala. So
I
imagine,
remember.
yeah, and like I was losing my mind. I'm like, wait a minute, what is this? This outfit is dope. And it's like the mutants version of the Met Gala. And so like
Yes.
Emma Frost becomes this person where like she has three different looks. So it's like, oh, look at her design in this and her design in this. And like if you're just a casual observer of X-Men, but you just like visual stuff, like looking at their looks, we're like, yo, let me find out. It was bad.
Yeah, Doctor Doom. I don't know if you know, like Doctor Doom. This man was so clean. I think he had Gucci stockings on and a cape. He had a designer mask on. I was like, "Yo, Doctor
Yes.
Doom out here fresh,
Yo,
bro."
let me tell you, Colossus, I swear Colossus looked like he was coming out of a Drake video. I'm like, whoa, okay now. Whoever's doing this design work over here, give them overtime.
I'm pretty sure Cyclops had his chest out. Like
He did.
I'm trying to remember.
He definitely
You're
did.
right. It is definitely the Met Gala for Mutantdom, and they came out clean, bro. Oh my goodness,
Right.
that was yeah,
They set Twitter on
that was
fire with
dope.
that one.
They sure did. They sure did. That was dope. Yeah, man. So Emma being a part of it is a big deal. And when you read later on, like we ain't gonna say all this for you, but when you read later on, you realize that like Emma is a big enough deal that she should know everything that's going on, and it bites them in the butt for them not telling Emma everything from the jump. Because again, this woman ran the X-Men for some time. Like, she is not to be played with. She's a big deal, and she's a savvy businesswoman. So it is what it is. Mike, anything else? We talked about a lot, bro. We talked about Krakoa, talked about the Quiet Council. We've talked about the many lives of Mara McTaggart. We've even talked about some of the books that come later on in the series and Dawn of X and some of the other later things going on there. Is there anything else that comes to mind when you think about House and Powers of X?
Yeah, yo, I think the probably what was the best thing about this one. After reading it, like a lot of people, the on online, I kept hearing a lot of people say, like, "Are the X Men the villains now?" Like, because at when they teamed up with, you start seeing like them moving, like how they're moving with like Mystique and Apocalypse and Exodus, all these people who have historically all been villains. And so like everybody initially wanted to like, for casual readers, they're like, wait a minute, are the X-Men bad guys? Like that idea and that question came up being real interesting. It's like, when they decided they're not going to keep trying to assimilate into humanity, they're gonna do their own thing, get their own power.
Mm.
Like even just as a reader, it starts to make you wonder, like, ooh, well, does that mean they're no like do they no longer fall in this traditional sense of goodness for me? And that was real interesting. Like that, it's interesting to see how that starts to move and how that plays out. But overall, it's great and amazing. But like to see how the villains now are so compelling that they're no longer just like they're not just full-fledged villains. Even Apocalypse, like when we thought about Apocalypse, a little bit of a spoiler. Like initially, it's just like, oh, he's a mad person. He's been alive for thousands of years, survival of the fittest. But like one of the best things they did, they actually humanized him. They talked about like Apocalypse had a family, and they talked about what happened to his family. And what happened to his family is why Apocalypse was so driven in terms of like, I gotta make sure everybody is ready. You gotta be the strongest possible to deal with what I know is coming. And like to humanize him and like, yo, now Apocalypse was like, I never thought his character was as dope until I read this. And like every one of them is like that now. Mystique is like that now. Exodus is like that now. Even Sinister, well, Sinister,
Sinister.
yeah, a little bit.
But no, I became an Apocalypse fan. I used to hate that man. I
Yeah.
became an Apocalypse fan because of this series. I was like, yo, that's my guy. I can't wait. I don't know when he's coming back. I don't know if he's coming
Oh,
back.
but when he come back, you
But when
know.
he come back with the whole, I just want to know what he been doing over there
Oh,
the whole time since that battle. It look okay, just a little bit because I'm nerding out here. You come to realize that Apocalypse's wife, like, let him stay on Earth because she's like, you can't handle what we have to face. I'm stronger than you, and you know it. So I will take care of this, and you take care of home. And when I read that, I was like, hold on, Apocalypse was the weak one.
right.
Like, what? Head
Mind blown.
explosion. Well, then, Mike, I think a good way for us to end this is just talking about the mythos of X-Men and how it juxtaposed to Black culture, in particular Black American culture. It has been said over and over again how Professor X, in some way, shapes, or forms, can be reminiscent to Martin Luther King and Magneto, similar to Malcolm X. That, as we know, that it could play out a lot more, and there's way more complexities, and you can think about how other characters relate to Du Bois, and how a lot of Magneto was doing was reminiscent to Marcus Garvey. But like in general, like the exploration of mutant is very much so similar to the exploration of the plight of Black folks here in this country. So when we think about what they did in House of Powers of X, they created their own country. They created their own government. How, like, it, I oftentimes wonder, I was like, yo, what if Black folks did this? Like, what if
Mhm.
we like did all the stuff that they did? What if we like laid down our differences, created a country? That is how mind-boggling this story is, and it just made me think deeply about that. Anything else, brother?
I was gonna say to your point, it definitely does ring a bell in some degree. Like, what happened if we consolidate like our power and like we become our own body and like kind of take like autonomy for ourselves. Like in the comic, in the first episode, they're bringing a couple of ambassadors from around the country. They want to see the Krakoa, and so they're walking through this hallway and they see these symbols up on the line. So also what makes the Jonathan Hickman so committed, they created a whole nother language. So I don't know if you noticed, like at the end of every X-Men comic, there's like those little weird symbols and stuff. So Jonathan Hickman created a whole new language, a whole new alphabet just for just for Krakoa. And then like that language is only shared amongst you amongst mutants. Humans don't know Krakoan language. And like I would say, I know you kind of took it to like, what if we had a place? I'm thinking almost like digitally. I think about like Black Twitter, right? And so like the idea of like these digital spaces
Mm.
that we end up having and we create for ourselves, but then how easy is it that people who are not a part of like Black culture like go like, oh well, that's what's going on, and now I'm going to share that meme too. I want to be relevant. I'm going to do this or this, and like it becomes like, okay, the joke was fun until they found it. Now I'm not going to use it no more. So I think about like some of the digital spaces we have, and just like some of like, yeah, or even like the cookout, right? Like the idea of like
Hmm.
who gets invited to the cookout. Well, like what if nobody got invited to the cookout, but just the people who we know are supposed to be there? And so it makes me think about that just a bit. But like it's a really compelling idea, like how far you can go, like with like real solidarity and like community.
And it also makes me wonder, like, I feel like Jonathan Hickman defines what a society is. Like
Hmm.
society, there's language, there's commerce, there's government, there's like camaraderie, there's rules. Like he kind of like breaks it down and is like, well, if the mutants were going to have a society, this is what their society would look like, and this is how they would go about making a society. And like, I don't know. Well, like, I don't know if this is ever going to end because I think this is going to be the X-Men going forward. And two, like right now, it currently exists just in comic books. But like, I don't know what you think, Mike. There is going to be a movie of this in some way, shape, or form. There's going to be a TV show of this in some way, shape, or
Oh,
form.
it's coming.
And it is going to be amazing.
It is coming.
Like,
And my big mad theory is this: the MCU is working like that's why they bring people like Jonathan Hickman on now, and I think after Jonathan Hickman ended his run, oh, I'm blanking on the guy's name who's doing writing at Office right now. Kieran Gillen, I think.
yeah,
So he's the one he picked up and he's doing a good job. But the idea is like they're trying to pump out all these stories now in the comics to give like a lot of idea because they're still doing like the Avengers is kind of the thing. And then once they move into like Fantastic Four, start giving you like a lot more some of that stuff, that's when the X-Men are gonna start to play in there. And now they got this, they got the mojo going with like, let's do a movie, let's do some Disney series, like they're gonna that combo with all you got with the X-Men, like
it's
they're gonna
about
have
to
content
just
for
be
forever.
X-Men. They're about to be done with all these other. They're about to be done with everything else. They're like, yo, as soon as we've gotten all the money we can get from Wakanda and from, I don't know, Ant-Man, we about to go full blown X-Men. X-Men everything. Cause like they got all the IP they need. They got
Yeah,
all the stories. They got all the stories in this run, bruh. So like,
just right
yeah, I
here,
think
and they know
they're
it's
good.
compelling. They know people will, no matter when they drop it. I will be at the movie on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday to see
Facts. Facts. Well, look, Mike, thank you. You just gave me hope for the MCU. You know, I was feeling a little
it.
so-so about it, but like I just read this whole series. I will watch all of it. So thank you, brother.
Amen. Amen. Thank you for letting me talk about my favorite pastime. I read this day in and day out, and to talk about it now with you is also like, oh, now I'm gonna go back and reread this one and this one.
Well, there we go. So yeah, I'm sure you all feel this all way already, but please believe we will try to have Mike back in some way, shape, or form. There is a whole bunch of comic books that we can talk about. We also have been waiting patiently to have an X-Men episode. And you know we're gonna pull Michael Stevens there for that X-Men episode. So, Mike,
Be there.
thank you, thank you, thank you. We greatly appreciate you, brother.
I thank you, good people. I appreciate being here.
And thank you all for listening. We have a new episode every month. You can find us on all social media at Pop Cult Parent, POPCULTPARENT. Visit us at www.popcultparent.com. Email us at popcultparent@gmail.com. Don't forget to rate us, review, and subscribe. And as always, enjoy the call. Peace.